Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, I've got Chaz in the studio with me. For those of you who don't know Chaz, he's a regular correspondent with us. He's one of our Discord mods, just an all-around great guy. And Chaz and I were talking a few weeks ago about, the potential of, okay, what can we talk about on the podcast? And Chaz has a tremendous amount of experience when it comes to airsoft teching, working on airsoft guns, all different kinds of guns. And one of the things that really sort of stood out in our initial conversations was this idea of people getting into teching with airsoft, and in particular looking at boneyard guns. So looking at guns that are airsoft replicas that are not working for some reason, that people are selling off cheap and thinking, oh yeah, that's a great project for me, or I'll be able to build a new gun for cheap or whatever. And in our initial conversations, we were like, there's a lot of complexities to that, and we think it would make for a really good podcast episode because there's so much variability out there and so on. So that I think is going to be the meat and potatoes for today. But as well, I think there's a portion here around used airsoft replicas, used gear in general. I mean, it's no secret there's a huge residual market, right, for used gear, used airsoft replicas. There's, the Reddit airsoft marketplace. There's Hop Up. There is the Airsoft Marketplace Canada on Reddit. There's the Airsoft Canada forums, which I used basically my entire time playing airsoft. Every single airsoft gun that I've ever bought came off the Airsoft Canada classifieds. Whether or not it was almost like new condition when I got it is a different story. But so you can absolutely do that. You don't necessarily have to buy from retailers, but when you buy a used gun, there can be particularities to that. And especially when you're looking at boneyards where, you're going to kind of like if you're like a car enthusiast, you buy something at a junkyard, like, oh, I'm going to fix it up. Well, you need to know what you're doing. There's considerations. So that's, I think, what we're going to talk about today with Chaz, who, as an aside, whose opinion on airsoft teching matters, I take very seriously, right? Like Pat and I work on my airsoft gun all the time, but Chaz has a lot of really great ideas. He knows a lot about what's worked for him in the past. And spoiler alert, I mean, it does work for other people too. Has it worked for me in my exact situation? Not necessarily, because of the realities we're going to talk about today, right? Airsoft guns are special, right?
You gotta let that max hop up go, Phil.
No, I got what it's back in my gun. It's working. It's totally good. Oh, well, yeah, because now I've got I've got the Kythera now. I've got a different receipt. So
that's true.
It's the particularities, right? Like something that works for one person with one particular setup might not work for you. But anyways, we'll get into that. So I think, I'm glad to have this conversation with you because boneyard guns. It's something that I've seen since I've been playing airsoft. People are like, oh, I'm selling this as boneyard, super cheap, like $100 Canadian, which by the way, $100 Canadian for us is super cheap. It's not maybe not $100 by your standards, but and it's not something that I've ever delved into because it seems really daunting, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Most of the time we all get into airsoft and, go to the airsoft store or go online because there's plenty of online ways to buy a gun. Amazon, Airsoft GI, here in the US at least, Amazon, Airsoft GI, EVIC, SS Airsoft, all over the country. There are retailers, and of course they love to do business online. And that's the way most people, I think, buy their first airsoft guns. There's a lot of theories out there on the first timers, a newbie buying an airsoft gun. Do you buy a beginner gun? Which I hate that term, and I hate the idea of a beginner gun because that generally refers to a very low end, inexpensive gun, something in the 200 or sub 200 range. I mean, I know for a fact you can buy a gun and get it here to the US for or find it here in the US, I should say, um, for, less than $100. I've done it.
Yeah.
Um, that right there. Right there, that MP5K that you've heard me bitch about so much.
Yeah.
But thinking about it though, most of my collection back here is actually used guns.
Hmm.
There's very few that are new that I bought. Let me think of the guns, and the screen isn't showing all of them. There's a few more to the side, but
Hmm.
only three of those were bought new, and then
Right.
the MP5K was bought new as well. But beyond that, everything else was a used gun that I bought.
Yeah. And we can talk about that in a sec, or on another episode. But there's everyone that wants to upgrade their airsoft guns, right? That's
Yeah.
everyone's always talking about it. Doesn't matter at what level you're talking about. The first time you play airsoft, like you're having a great time and you're enjoying yourself, but at the same time you're also recognizing the limitations of the airsoft gun that you're using, because typically what you are learning to play on is a beginner gun or a rental gun, which is shooting what, like 75 feet, right? Like it's shooting like might be shooting a jewel, like depending on how well maintained it is, etc. Unless you happen to be playing with people who are more experienced, who have better gear that you can use. Like if we take somebody out for a day or whatever, they're using a
Hmm.
gun that is significantly better than those beginner guns that you're talking about. So right off the hop, you're like, oh, it would be great if I could shoot further. It would be great if I could shoot, from twice that distance. And people immediately will tell you, oh, you can do that. You got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. And suddenly you get inundated with, oh, I've been playing airsoft for like 3 games, and now I've got to put $400 worth of
But
upgrades in
often,
my gun, right?
but oftentimes, Phil, though, and I've experienced this, and we talked about it in that last podcast I was on, the one after Battle for Los Angeles 5, where both Sam and I, these guys would come up, and there were a lot of newbies at that game, and they were like, "Oh, my gun just isn't shooting." It's like, well, did you adjust the hop up?
Hmm. Yeah.
And surely, you take the gun, you shoot it, and it's like whoop, whoop, just dropping, after 50 feet. And you adjust the hop up, hand it back to them, and they're like, oh my God, it's like a whole brand new gun all over
Yeah.
again. So just understanding how an airsoft gun works, is the beginning of learning how to tech, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Understanding how and what makes an airsoft gun works is super important to teching.
Yeah, and you have then people who are in this position where they look at, they start learning initially, and by virtue of the fact that there's so much knowledge available out there on airsoft teching by form, of the videos, people who are available in communities like ours to
Mhm.
provide input and insight and stuff like that. As a beginner, you can very quickly be inundated with opinions and ideas, but also if
Absolutely.
someone were to listen to you talk about teching, for you, very basic things are not necessarily basic to somebody else who is just learning brand new.
This
And
is
so
true.
they're listening to all this stuff and they're like, oh, yeah, I could do that. And that's where they fall, I think, into this trap of, I see this Boneyard gun. Let me just fix it up. And instead of shelling out,
Yeah.
$800 for the top tier gun, I can spend $200 in a couple of upgrades and I'll have the exact same thing. And I think that is a misconception, right?
Oh, absolutely. Getting in over your head is so easy to do, and that
Hmm.
can happen with a brand new gun or a boneyard or just a lightly used gun. And I think that's how you have to classify them, as new, lightly used, that you can just buy from somebody and just start playing with it, or a boneyard gun. And in
Hmm.
what I call a boneyard gun, I mean, and there's some variability in that as well. Um, Plug a battery in, okay, it shoots, it's working. Technically, it might be at the lower end of a lightly used gun, um, to a gun in a box. Like, if it wasn't for the box, the gun would not be together.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I've bought a couple like that.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful about knowing what you're buying. You're buying a brand new gun, you're pretty assured that it's going to work, and you have a little bit of a warranty with it through most providers.
Yeah.
I think 60 days is generally, or 30 days, something like that. If you take it out and you say, oh, it was just shooting fine, and then all of a sudden it just stopped, and yet the receiver is cracked and or the stock is snapped off, it's like,
Yeah.
most retailers, at least the, our local one here, Fox Airsoft, they're very good about taking. I've been in the shop when kids have come in with their parents and they're like, it was just working and then this happened, and it's like, you fell on it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
snapped it in half. But and they'll take it back. But there is no recourse on a used gun. If
Yeah.
you buy it from somebody off of Hop Up or any of the other ways to do it, you better know what you're getting into, because you're going to be stuck with that thing.
Yeah. And I've had, in my experiences, like I've had situations where I had a gun that I sold to someone, and I it was in working condition. I brought it to his place, and then he shot it, and then he wanted to inspect some of the other stuff, and so he took the motor out after I was gone, and then he was like, "Oh, well, the wires are all stripped. Like, why did you sell that to me in that condition?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't recall the wires being stripped when I sold it to you, um,
Yeah.
but like, I mean, is it possible? Like, yeah. So I'm gonna give this guy the benefit of the doubt, so that I
Yeah.
give him back a bit of money to be like, okay, fine, whatever, right?
It'd
But
get you
like,
nice.
and I mean, maybe that was me being too nice for sure. But he's our community is very small. Like keeping
Yeah,
people, happy and
exactly.
stuff is fine. And it's $50 in difference. That's okay. But that is the kind of thing that you need to be prepared for in the used space. And if the gun is working, then it has to be working. But what one person considers working and what one person considers working might not be the same thing. And to be honest, like you're not doing a full fledged field test in someone's
Oh,
garage, putting like, 5 rounds through a chrono to show that it's shooting the right velocity. And in the
absolutely.
same way, we talked about this, you're talking about it, right? Like different people have different experience levels. Well, different people will consider different things boneyard based on that experience level too. I'd
Yeah.
say for you to consider something one of the guns behind you to be a boneyard gun, that thing would have to be basically next to destroyed, right? Whereas if you put me in that position, for me to go like, okay, I've reached the maximum of what I'm capable and interested in doing, it'll happen much sooner,
Yeah.
right? So there's also that aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's comes down to personal skill level when it comes to
Yeah,
teching stuff. So, um, would I tell a complete noob, somebody that's just like, oh my god, I just discovered airsoft, um, to get in and start, buying a cheap boneyard gun? Oh god, no, 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 no,
yeah,
no. I would say go buy the brand new gun, enjoy it, play with it. And that's the thing is, I think you've been playing airsoft longer than I have. My son started and kind of got me into it, and it took me a few years to get into it. But in that time, I've seen a lot of quality increase in new guns.
absolutely.
What happens is the competition gets higher, and then the price has to come down on other guns, and then and somewhere in the middle, like manufacturers will come out with their basic guns or their competition series or their sports series. Some call it. They have all sorts of terminologies for it. And so what one company says is one thing is
Hmm.
completely different. There is no standard anymore. There is no TM
Yeah,
standard. There used to be a standard that all interior parts were made to, and this goes to teching as well. Um, there used to be a standard for that, based on the original Tokyo Marui designs, and all of the airsoft guns, the AEGs, are based off of that idea. But you know, there's an ICS over there. Um, None of their internal parts will work. I mean,
yeah,
the piston is the same, the piston head is the same, the cylinder head and the cylinder, and those are pretty common parts that are the same. Um, but beyond that, like the nozzle on an ICS is different than almost every other gun out there, and therefore the hop up is different. And that's what leads companies like Max Model, the people who made your nemesis for a while, and now it's your
My
hero.
best friend.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, your best. You've come to learn to love that. um, they make a special one specifically for ICS, so there's that aspect.
Yeah.
um, and that was a tangent, I'm sure. What were we talking about?
But I think, you're right though. Like I think, back to when I was starting, like Tokyo was the standard. My first gun was a Tokyo gun because that's what the standard was, and I
Right.
had the income for that, especially in Canada. They were very expensive. But I look
Oh,
at
they're
some of the
expensive
guns that
everywhere.
other people, well, I mean, yeah, but at the time especially,
Yeah.
um like you will, back then I was spending like 2 or 3 times as much as what you would spend for like an entry gun, right? And
Yeah.
so I look at like the entry guns in like 2006, 2007, 2008 compared to even like the G&G combat machines, the CM16 Raiders or whatever.
Hmm.
Those were way better than the entry guns that we were using back in 2008, 2009, etc. And now if you compare the, like a Sima or something like that to the CM16 Raiders, they're even better still. So the
Yeah.
necessity for a new player to shell out a lot of money, like, $500 plus on an airsoft gun that will do them and not just be a piece of crap, it is just not there. But
No.
coming to Boneyard, I think the whole idea behind doing a Boneyard gun is people think that by doing that they will save money, right? It'll be cheaper for them
Yeah.
to buy the Boneyard and put the upgrades in it than to just buy the equivalent good airsoft gun, or to take a decent platform and just upgrade that. And for your money, and I think for my money, like that's just, it doesn't necessarily shake out that way. It certainly, it can for
Yeah.
some people, but I think it's a misconception for most, right?
But I think that's the rolling of the dice that you do when you
Mm-hmm.
buy a gun, a used gun like that. Um, I mean, I've got several different stories on that. Here's one great example of it. So, hey, shout out to Todd, tugboat captain. So this is a SIG 552 Commando that Todd found for me, and because him and I were chatting one day, and I told him, I said, one gun that I've always been looking for is this SIG 552 by ICS. Um, and they haven't been made in a really long time. And the ones that are out there that you could buy new are really bad, and just not worth it. Just not
Mm-hmm.
worth it. Like, just not good quality stuff. But when ICS made this guy, um, they really made a very, very nice gun. Real early rotary hop up in it. Before all the modern, M4 rotary hop ups,
Mm-hmm.
ICS did that. Um, and, because Todd, and it was, so Todd's out in North Carolina. I'm in Colorado. So I'm going to base me buying this gun on Todd's opinion of the gun. So he took
Mm-hmm.
it out, he shot it, he actually played a game, it was like a pickup day game. So, whatever, they went out and played for 20, 30 minutes. He used this gun in the form that I got it in. And he said it was completely fine and it actually shot pretty well. And so I agreed to pay the money for it. And I sent, Todd, being the saint that he is, bought me the gun, shipped it to me, and then I paid him for all of it. Worked
Mm-hmm.
out really, really well. It turns out it's still a wonderful gun. I used it this past weekend, and it's just like a laser beam. It's
Right.
a fun gun to play with. And so in that particular case, I had an intermediary looking at the gun and telling me, is like, yeah, this is a quality gun. It's all there. It has all these parts, and it comes with, you know, working mags, so it that was a good buy.
Yeah.
Um,
And it just so happened that you had an intermediary as well
yeah,
who had the experience that you trusted to be able to
exactly.
give you an
Absolutely.
opinion that you can take to the bank, so to speak. I mean, you did
Yes.
literally take it to the bank
And
eventually, right?
that's almost that almost never happens,
Mm-hmm.
and I may not have bought the gun otherwise.
Right.
Um, but it turns out that's a great gun. Hasn't been made in probably 10 years. Todd actually wants another one himself because he had that gun and he was like, "Oh, should I just turn it over to tell Jazz about it? If not, he was going to buy it, I think." But he let me buy it. Anyhow, but that was a good gun. That was a good buy. It was a good. It was I think it turned out it was probably in the 140-ish range or something. So
Yeah.
US. So yeah, that's an expensive used gun.
But
Um,
as well, you talk about rolling the dice, but this is a model that you were specifically looking for, right?
exactly, and that's
So,
one reason to
yeah.
do this search for used guns because that gun, ICS is no longer making that gun, and
Hmm.
that's the only way you're going to find that gun.
Yeah. And so when you're in that position, it's different. It's a different, you talk about rolling the dice and you're still rolling the dice,
Yeah,
but the dice roll, the game is a bit different because what you're looking for is less, oh, I want to save some money on a boneyard gun. And more, I want this particular thing. And chances are, like you paid 140, you probably would have paid a little bit more than that, ideally a little bit less, but like you want that gun. So if that's what it costs, then that's what it costs, versus I want to
yeah,
get the absolute cheapest thing, even if it's not
yeah,
working, and then I'll put my parts in it and it'll be fine. And that, it's a different roll of the dice in that situation because in this
absolutely.
situation, you had this intermediary, right? If you hadn't had this intermediary and you were the one looking for it, let's say locally, then you are the expert in this situation.
Yeah.
But now imagine you are not you're like a newbie. You don't have the experience to know whether it's working or not, what it's going to need, etc. And the person who's selling it to you may also not have, well, the fact that they could be malevolent aside, right? Let's say
Yeah.
they're being upstanding about it. They might also not have the knowledge of why this is not working or be even correct in their assessment,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. So I'm 1 for 2 on hop up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I've bought one gun successfully, which is also a boneyard gun behind me there, and it's turned out to be it's another gun that I wanted, and once I saw it, I was like, I had to have it. Um, but that one came in a box. That was not a complete one. But the second time I tried to buy a gun on hop up, I think it was a young person, in the listing, he said he wanted $100 for an AKM, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to gut this thing. I'm going to fix it up. But I wanted the platform of an AKM to build my Tarkov AK, 47.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the listing, he said, oh, $100, willing to negotiate. Um, I don't think he understood what those words meant.
Yeah, that's
Willing to
classic. Yeah.
negotiate. Yeah, he wanted $100. Might as well have put $100. Don't try to get it any cheaper. I know what I got.
Yeah.
Um, but so I went in and offered him less, and it was the worst experience trying to deal with him. He's like, it's just locked up. I'm like, what does that mean? It's just locked up. That there could be teeth missing on those gears.
Yeah.
New set of gears. Could be the piston is destroyed and jammed in there. New piston, new piston head probably if it's jammed up. Maybe the threading came out of the screw that holds the piston head to the piston. All of these things. There's 100 different reasons, or it could just be semi-auto lockup. When you're sitting there spamming in a basic gun, a gun without a MOSFET, and just trigger context. Sometimes when you're spamming really hard and fast, especially in version 2s, they'll lock up.
Yeah.
And the only fix for it is switching it over to full auto, which kicks the trolley in the trigger context off and resets it. And so that's the only fix. And this is why AEG should always have MOSFETs in them. But
Yeah.
I know, expensive. But but yeah, it could have simply been that, and this kid just didn't know. So
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah, you've just got to really pay attention to what people are saying, and ultimately, I just let that whole thing go because
Yeah.
it wasn't worth the time dealing with, being frustrated, and then ultimately just getting a cheap gun.
Mhm. And I mean that one experience aside, I think when people say, okay, well, this is the problem with it or whatever, my question is always, well, why haven't you fixed it? Right? If
Exactly.
it's just that, right? Like, why didn't you just fix it? Right? And if the answer to that question is I don't have the skills, I don't have the time, I don't have the interest, fair enough.
Yeah,
But if you don't have the skills, then how do you really know that that's what the only part of the problem is? Right? And
absolutely,
so
100%.
when you're and I think we, as airsofters, we fall into this trap sometimes because we get really excited about the prospect of the new shiny thing, right? And so you kind of have your blinders on. You're like, oh yeah, it's probably just this, whatever. And we're not really thinking as critically as we need to be, especially if we're early in our time playing airsoft. Especially if this is like our first gun or close on it, you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great deal, it's a great deal. I'll be able to fix it, and we're not thinking about, okay, do I have the skills to diagnose and fix it? Because, like you were saying before, it could be a variety of different things. And so, if it's
Yeah.
semi-auto lockup, good news, right? It's going to be easy, right? If it's there's the motor is burnt out and probably an easy fix, right? But then if you're like, oh, there's a part of the gearbox that's sheared off and the gears don't stay in place anymore, like this is a very vastly different problem,
Oh yeah,
right?
it's a sliding scale of what could be wrong. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
with that many moving parts inside of an AEG, uh, could broken tappet plate,
Yep.
broken teeth on gears, motor burnt out, wires trashed and frayed. I mean, it just goes on and on and on about what could be wrong with it. And I think you're right. I think sometimes people do get tunnel vision and they just get so laser focused. There's that, but I think what also happens is and I fell prey to this myself, is the opposite. Here I am supposed to be the expert, in a few years of messing with guns and doing things. I see something, I'm like, oh yeah, I can fix that. Oh yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's all blown up and trashed,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna fix that. I'm just gonna drop new gears in that anyway. And then you're like, wow, what did I buy? So
Yeah.
again, you have to reconcile yourself to, you know, you might just buy a turd, and it's
Yeah.
never going to be anything more than that. And you just have to be okay with that if you're going to buy a Boneyard gun.
Yeah, and that's, I think, why, like, it's so important that especially our newer players, really be aware of that, because
Yeah.
if you're, like a lot of people who are younger who are starting out playing, and even some who are not as young, I mean, your airsoft budget is likely going to be very limited, and you may only have one airsoft gun, right?
Hmm.
And so, you look at getting a boneyard or whatever, and then you're investing all of your time and energy in this, and it doesn't really do what you need it to. Like, that's extremely defeating, right? And
Yeah.
teching on a gun that's already broke, learning to tech, I should say, on a gun that's already broken is not a good way to learn, especially if you're also, hinging that on, oh, well, I'm going to be playing, in the next couple of months, I got to get this boneyard gun running. Okay, but if you have a game coming up and you're relying on your abilities to get this gun up and running, you better already have those skills, because then you're compounding everything. Not only are you learning, which is a process where you're going to make mistakes,
Yeah.
but on top of that, you're putting on time pressures on you, because if it doesn't go, then you might not be
And
able to play the thing that you're planning, or whatever. Like,
yeah.
you're absolutely right. When you talk about rolling the dice, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Like, like you think about like playing in a casino or whatever. Not that I've ever done that, but like I understand that these are games of odds and stuff. But it's not just about the odds. You have to understand how the game is played to begin with,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, I don't
Well,
know anything about craps. There's a table, there's a spinning thing. I don't know anything about it. if I go and I play that, I'm just going to be like, I'm going to lose my money because I have no idea how this works. And
As long as you have a drink
Boneyard's,
in your hand, you'll be fine.
well, I suppose maybe it'll ease the pain. But
Yeah,
I'm gonna lose, or I just happen to get very, very lucky. But the odds are not
exactly.
in my favor, right? If I don't
No,
even know the game
absolutely not.
rules, yeah,
But see, that's, I don't want to say that, you shouldn't be buying a Boneyard gun unless you're, you know, eminently qualified to tear apart
totally, totally,
any
yeah,
airsoft gun, because, um, you may buy a gun and it may be broken and it may be a flaming pile of crap. Uh, but at least you're going to be able to open it up and maybe you spent $25 on it.
hmm
Okay. I can think of a lot of silly ways to spend $25. Sp-
I've eaten more than
oh,
$25 worth of food, so yeah,
yeah,
right,
I think we
like,
all have.
yeah,
I've bought more. I bought a drink that costs more than $25. It's
yeah,
simple.
totally,
But so it may not be the worst idea, to buy something like that you just going to fiddle around with. Maybe you've already got a good working AEG or a good working airsoft gun. Don't mess with that one. Buy
hmm
a Boneyard gun that is in, hopefully it's working at some level, and take it apart. I think that's a completely fair way to do it, because you don't really want to tack on, a brand new, completely working gun, especially if you're, a week out of an event or a game that you want to play. But
hmm
a Boneyard gun is a great entry into what's inside here. How do these things work? Because I think a
yeah,
lot of people are afraid. I know I was. When I first started, I was like, "Oh, I'm just going to take my guns to the shop and let them fix it because I'm afraid to open these things up." Well, as it turned out, the shop wasn't any better.
yeah,
I got a gun back. They didn't tighten down a single screw that holds down the trigger contacts. It backed out, got into the gears, snapped teeth off of this beautiful set of 16-1 Lonex
oof,
gears, and then they replaced it with non Lonex
hmm
gears, 16-1 still, but it's like, not happy. So it was after that also they installed the spring backward, on
of
a
course,
non-linear spring is supposed to
yeah,
only go in one direction. And they had that installed backwards, and I was like, okay, this is it. And that's when I did the deep dive into YouTube and just watched every video on every, starting with version 2s, and just how to take these things apart. It's just because they don't all come apart in the same way, but in a
yeah,
general sense, most, let's say, M4s come apart in a very similar manner, with a few exceptions. But that's how I started learning, and so I think a Boneyard gun might be a good teaching tool. Not expecting to turn it into, the laser beam, super slayer gun thing.
yeah.
Um, so that's an option, I think, out there.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because the way that I learned, the way that Patrick taught me how to assemble and disassemble and reassemble a V2 gearbox is he had an old V2 gearbox in it. He had a whole bunch of parts in his basement that were just junk parts or whatever.
Yeah,
And so he put it together and he was like, okay, take it apart. Okay,
that's
put it back
amazing.
together.
Yeah,
Okay, take it apart, put it back together. And then once I had done that 5 or 6 times and he was confident that he didn't need to watch me anymore, he's like, okay, you got it. It's fine.
yeah,
Right. And I could have watched 10 million airsoft videos on how to open and close a V2 gearbox, and it would not have taught me as much as just doing that in a no pressure environment because his gearbox is never really going to work. And that's not the
yeah,
purpose of it. It's just a training tool. So I totally can see that. I think the
yeah,
challenge that people fall into and fall prey to is this idea of like, I'm going to fix this gun
yeah,
and I'm going to save, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Well, number one, how many guns have you worked on already? Just the one or two? Like,
yeah,
maybe you need to work on more. And then number two is it actually going to be cheaper when you start looking at all the parts that you want to put in there? Because, I mean, unless you happen to have those parts just kicking around your shop like you or Pat, or all of the other airsoft techs, the guys like Todd and stuff who happen to have inventory in your house
Hmm.
in some way, shape, or form, you're going to have to go out there and buy potentially new gears, a new piston, a new
Oh,
motor,
absolutely.
maybe all of those things depending on the state
Yeah.
of the boneyard. And so suddenly maybe you're already over $100 into new parts, right?
Yeah. And let's say you bought it for $80, $100. Let's just say $100 just to keep things even. Um, and yeah, you can quickly spend another 80 to $100 in parts, buying that MOSFET, and you throw a MOSFET in there, now you're closer to 175, $150. Um, and those are just the parts in the gun. And it's not all in there. Now it's the time, and how much is your time worth?
Mm-hmm.
So it can be not inexpensive. I mean, or did I say that right? It can be expensive. Let's just say it that way.
Yeah.
Um, I think, there's all sorts of traps people fall into doing that. Just buying all the best stuff. Oh, I'll get the Max this and the Perrin that and blah, 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 blah. All the name brand parts. And then they just throw them in there. And it's like, they don't work together.
Yeah.
And in a gun that was not working to begin with, um, that's a recipe for disaster. I think going slow with stuff, again, buying a gun that maybe is working, that's shooting, put a battery in it, and it'll hurl a BB. It
Mm-hmm.
may not be, optimal, but it's basically a working gun.
Yeah.
To the gun that is completely torn apart, missing parts, and sitting in a box somewhere. Um, I think those are generally cheaper, uh, unless they're a unique gun, um, with trades and you don't see it available anymore. So,
Yeah,
um,
and I think Pat has often sought like VFC M4 gearbox, or not gearboxes, excuse me, VFC like receivers and stuff like that,
oh yeah.
specifically to put a Kythera in or whatever, because they play really well with that.
Hmm.
And in those cases, you don't care if it's working or not because you're going to strip the inside and
Oh
put your
yeah,
own stuff in there. But again,
absolutely.
it's a very specific use case. You know what you are doing. You are specifically looking for something, and the function of it doesn't matter because you have a different plan for it. That's a different conversation,
Yeah.
right? If you're again like you're looking at your second airsoft gun, being like, I'm going to save $200 by doing this thing, and it's like, well, to your point just now, like if you're going to be putting upgrades and stuff, and you're looking and the cost, it's going to be, well, I'm going to spend $80 on this boneyard plus 120 worth of parts, and now I'm at $200. Would I have been better off just buying a $200 or close to $200 US airsoft gun, because 200 doesn't get you much in Canada, but like, would that have been better for you? And I'd say for the vast majority of especially beginner players,
Oh,
almost
absolutely.
certainly,
I would
right?
agree with that 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, there's just the things you would have to teach yourself and learn to get that, and I I I try to encourage people to go out and learn how to tech on their guns, to fix stuff themselves. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a skill that, you learn so much about teching on airsoft guns that is you can apply
Mm-hmm.
later on in life. Just working on your car, let's say, you got a tiny little screw, it's a fine thread. It's like you don't sit in there and just tighten it down, manila gorilla grip. You need to have a certain level of, just don't over tighten stuff. And you learn that quickly with airsoft, because when you do that, you strip out the threads in that aluminum zinc gearbox
Yeah.
shell, and now you got to buy a new gearbox shell because you went at it with the sledgehammer when you needed, and so that's something that you learn how much torque to apply to things, and that can go on, or knowing when to just get up and walk away from the gun.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's a huge, and unfortunately I think I probably learned that much later than I should have, because it's so frustrating,
Yeah.
when that anti I wish I could speak this evening. When that anti reversal latch, keeps popping out, and you're like, I'm
Yeah.
so close to closing this thing up, and so learning to walk away. So there's all sorts of things you can learn from teching on guns. But
And
yeah.
especially because there's things that you can do to your airsoft gun, especially the airsoft gun's body, that is irreversible.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Like I ripped off the like rail. Sorry, I ripped off part of the upper receiver trying to get a rail off by applying too much torque to it. Right? And
Oh,
the
yeah.
because the metal is cheap metal, it just
Yeah.
tore the receiver. What are
It's
you
not
gonna
a
do?
real gun.
It's not coming back together.
And even on a real gun, you can, especially like a let's just say an M4 or an AR. I have snapped off that the little part that sits in the lower receiver, and then the pin comes in through the side. I have ripped
Mm-hmm.
that ear completely off putting it in a vise, nice a smooth jaw vise so it doesn't mar up the thing. And all of a sudden it just goes and cracks it off. And it was like,
Yeah.
oh, and that was not just a cheap, A and K. Don't buy A and K as used guns. Don't buy A and K guns. But but I've snapped off my Lonex one like that too. So
Yeah.
live and
And
learn.
those and like yeah, like live and learn, but like learn from our mistakes too, guys. Like there's like Chaz was
Yeah.
saying, like there is an appropriate amount of torque and there's an appropriate amount of just physical manipulation that you can apply to something before you're like, and Pat says this before, has said this many times, it's like I pick up the hammer and I'm like, I need to put this down and walk away now because the hammer is
Yes.
not the right tool
Oh,
for
no.
this job. Doesn't matter what it is. Like rubber
Yeah.
mallet, maybe. But everything else, like, no, it's like I'm breaking out the power stop. No.
Yeah,
Right?
you're grabbing the crescent wrench, or yeah, it's like don't use crescent wrench, but
Vice grips, no.
Vice grips, nope, or something
Yeah.
that is designed for a nut that's as big as your head. Don't use that either.
Yeah.
Use finer tools. But
And especially when you're getting into it, like you really don't know what you don't know.
oh god,
right? And I remember one of the very first times I ever tried to do any sort of modification to my airsoft gun ever. This was my second gun. It was King Arms, I think SR16 apparently, but that's what the guy had said it was. But it was like it wasn't an SR16 because it's a full stock. But anyways, and the rail was super super short. But I was putting on a suppressor. And the suppressor that I had, this fake suppressor, I should be clear, had a specific flash hider so that you could click it on and off like a cool guy, right? So I had to get the flash hider off of my airsoft replica, and it would not come off. As much as I would turn, it would not come off. Tell me if you know where this is going. So I was like, okay, they must have applied some sort of glue or Loctite or something like that in the flash hider. So I'm there like dipping it in boiling water to try and release it and all this kind of stuff.
Time out. Is this a plastic flash hider?
Because
no. In the US, we have to deal with the way of
the orange tips. Yeah.
Orange plastic, or it's painted, or it's a steel one, then it's painted. So I just was wondering if it's plastic or
no. So this was some sort of metal, steel. I'm not sure, but some sort of metal. And so I have the pot of boiling water on the stove, and I've got the barrel just dipped in it because in my mind, this was the best way to loosen whatever adhesive or glue or whatever was in this flash hider.
Well, you're not entirely wrong.
But at the same time, the thing that's so stupid about this is that the flash hider screws on the other way. Right?
Yeah,
so I was torquing it down instead of trying to release it because someone explained to me later, it's like you're screwing the gun into the flash hider, not the flash hider into the gun. And I was like, well, that would have been nice to know. But I didn't know that. And so I'm torquing and I'm torquing and I'm torquing and I couldn't get it off. And then eventually I stopped and I'm like, maybe I should try the other direction. I tried the other direction and I'm like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. Right.
Oh, so you got it off without just.
I got it off. Oh yeah. And then I put my cool guy flash hider and like, so that was great.
And it worked.
And it worked fine. But like, this is a clear, to me, this is a classic example of you do not know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
And so in this situation, you could be forgiven for being like, oh my God, my flash hider is just on there permanently. I'm just never going to be able to remove it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't know that, then and you're not resourceful enough. Like, clearly I was super dumb at the time. Didn't think to try the other direction to see if that helped.
Did you not look
Um,
online, like
well, at the
YouTube, or
time,
was this was before
this
the
was
rise of
2007, right?
yeah, before the
So
rise of YouTube and what we
well,
know it
YouTube
is
didn't exist
today?
at the time, right?
Yeah.
Or if it did, it was I think 2007 was like the first year of YouTube. So
Yeah.
like, and so the only resource that I had at the time was Airsoft Canada, which is not an instantaneous resource. It was a
Oh
forum,
God, no.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I made a post, but like I'm in my
Like 3
kitchen getting
days.
ready to boil the water. So like nobody's getting back to me in time to
Yeah.
intervene to stop me for just be like, hey, dude, are you
Whoa,
stupid?
whoa,
Just
whoa.
twist
Yeah,
it the other
go
way,
the other
right?
way.
Um, and that's eventually that is what happened. Like some guy replied, "It's like, did you try turning it the other way?" And I was like, "Yes." Right? Like, what are you gonna do? But so something that's so basic
Yeah.
confused me, and I'm not the sharpest cheese in the sandwich, but I'm also not like an idiot, right? And I was still confused by it. So this can happen at any level about anything at any part of your
Oh
airsoft
yeah.
gun, and as complexity increases, it becomes more and more likely. So you really got to know and be okay with admitting, hey, I don't think I know enough. There's no shame in looking at something and being like, hey, I'm gonna take this Boneyard and I'm gonna fix it up, and being like, hey, wait a minute, no, that's stupid. You don't know nearly enough about teching to be able to realistically make this
Yeah.
assessment, right?
Well, I think, the other thing is sometimes, especially I see it on Discord, people will ask a question and I just, like, you didn't turn it the other direction. Like, why do I even have to say that? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's on us, uh, people that try to give advice. Say it all, because maybe someone doesn't know it all. Uh,
Yeah.
the other thing is, especially with flash hiders, and the other thing I was, there were 3 outcomes I was thinking. One, you weren't turning it the right direction. 2, there was a little grub screw
Oh, yeah, yeah. A little
inside of
grub
it.
screw. Yeah.
Or 3, it was glued on, and you
Mm-hmm.
did need to boil it or heat it some way. So, um, yeah, I'm glad it came off for you and you didn't shred all of the threads off of the
Well,
barrel. And
or twist it, yeah, or like to rip the outer barrel or
oh
damage
yeah,
it in
so
some
many
way,
bad
right?
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or bend it, just flat out bend it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's. I mean, airsoft guns are. We always say, oh well, maybe you should buy a metal body gun, and or um, there's some new polymers that are pretty cool, and some airsoft guns are only polymer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you need to be careful with them. They may be metal, but it's not good
They're
metal.
not good metal. Yeah.
It's not good. So being careful, and especially on an old gun that you finally found, I finally found the Sig 552 that I wanted. I can't get parts for that.
Yeah.
ICS does not make any parts for that gun anymore. They have given up on servicing that gun years ago.
Yeah.
So there is nothing new to buy. So being careful with that gun is really important. Um, Here's another one that let me reach back and get this. I think I can get it. My cord. Hold it. They're all black and look the same from this angle. So that's why you should paint your guns. But so this is a
Oh, the Evo Scorpion.
yeah, Scorpion Evo. This guy. Oh, hello. Okay. Anyhow, just discovering things. I've always wanted one of these, but they're not cheap.
Mm-hmm.
They're a fairly expensive gun, and I was over at the local gun retailer, and I was just admiring the Evos on the wall, and they had both the HPA version and the AEG version, and I was asking about them, and just like playing with them, holding them, doing all the things you do right before you buy a gun,
Mm-hmm.
and then one of the guys in the back, he goes, "You're pretty good with messing with guns. We've got this one in the back that it's all kind of it's not working. Would you be interested in that?" And I was like, how much?
Yeah.
And they sold it to me for, and this is what's nuts. So this particular Evo, um, they don't have serial numbers on it. This one is like one of the very, very, very first ones. This was one of the ones that they sent, that ASG, the company that makes these guns, sent out to all the YouTubers, to all of
Oh wow.
the stores, so they could get their hands on it and do videos about it and get the hype up out there for it. Um,
Hmm.
they sold me the case that they ASG made a case specifically for the gun, a soft shell case. It's all foam cut and everything for it. I got that too. And on the outside of that it says property of ASG demo model. So this gun is super early, but it came to me in a box and taken apart. And, I got like 8 mags with it, just all sorts of parts. And it was missing, I think there was a main return spring for the charging handle that was gone missing. And they were saying that the MOSFETs in these guns are a little touchy. Don't look sideways at them for too long, or else
Hmm.
they'll not work. And that was out. But the shop said, if you buy it, we'll get you a new MOSFET for it, and you install it and put it back together. And I was like, okay, that's $50 just for that replacement part
Yeah.
that ASG sells. So I did it. I bought it, and it turned out, again, it turned out really, really good. The gun works. It's phenomenal. It's a wonderful gun. And it's back to being used. So another one, but that was, that was one that you really like, boy, because this is a real specific gun, but the upside is that there's a lot of, aftermarket support for it. There's also,
Hmm.
real manufacturer support for it. You can buy the new parts for it still.
And that makes a big difference when you're talking about like trying
Yeah.
to repair, especially like for specific models. Like if you're trying to repair a Boneyard M4 of some sort, I mean, different story or an AK. Like there's airsoft parts like basically everywhere for
Oh
those.
yeah.
But then if you start getting more specific about like, oh, like I think for example of people who play in the reenactment space, like
Oh
Johnny,
yeah.
like if he's trying to get a grease gun up and running, or maybe an MP40, maybe not, but like a short magazine Lee Enfield or something, like your options are extremely limited if they
Yeah.
even exist. I remember the G&G Scar L that we had a proprietary like trigger, because it was
Yeah.
an ambi trigger, and the way that the trigger knob was, it had like a ball bearing inside for the clicking. That's
Oh
what
yeah.
held it in position.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you lose that ball bearing, you better
Yeah.
find another exact of the same one, because like what's gonna
Because
happen, like,
yeah, because it was made in Taiwan or China, they didn't use a standardized
yeah,
size ball
exactly.
bearing. It's a very unique and specific.
So yeah, and so like all of those things are also things that you need to consider when
Yeah.
you're looking at a boneyard gun. And if you're listening to this and going like, oh well, I don't need to worry about that kind of stuff because blah blah blah. Well, there's a difference between saying I don't need to worry about these kinds of things because I know I don't need to worry about them because I have the knowledge to say it's not going to be an issue in this circumstance. That's one
Hmm.
thing. But if you're saying, oh well, I want you to worry about that kind of stuff, and if you're being honest with yourself, that's more wishful thinking.
Yeah. I think
Maybe
you're
that you walk away,
I
right?
think you're absolutely right. You have to be honest with yourself. You can't, you really, I think we've seen it a few times. And maybe it was just the hype of, oh, everyone's saying, oh, you can do this. And I'm specifically talking about on the Discord. We've seen a couple
Mm-hmm.
examples of it where somebody has gotten in over their head, because they were talked up that, everyone's saying, oh, well, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. Okay, well, everyone's saying I can do it. And it didn't happen. So you be honest with yourself and really assess your skill level. I think that's fair to yourself,
Yeah.
and to your wallet, because it can.
And asking yourself, I think, can you afford to take an L, as the kids say? Can you
Yeah,
afford to take a loss in this situation?
yeah,
Because if you can't, then you shouldn't. It's literally like gambling. If you can't afford to lose the money, you shouldn't be playing.
Oh,
right? Point
absolutely.
blank. And
Absolutely.
I think we see, you're right, in the Discord, but just in general, I think in
Yeah.
the airsoft and in hobby spaces in general, airsoft is not
Oh,
unique to that. We
absolutely.
see a lot of people like with that wishful thinking approach. It's like, oh well, it's just a hobby, it's for fun. I'll be able to do that, no big deal. But it's more complicated than that. And even for me, like I've been playing airsoft a really long time. I've been teching around, Pat, who is um, I would say very skilled. Jason, who's very skilled,
Absolutely.
spend a lot of time talking to you. Guys on the Discord like Koro and stuff who have a lot of knowledge. And even still, I am constantly abutting against stuff that I don't know or I'm only doing for the first time. Polishing barrels is a good example. I have never polished an airsoft barrel in my life until I did it the other day.
Yeah.
And I watched a whole bunch of videos. And when I started doing it, I was like, am I doing this right? I don't know. And I went through the process. Now, the risk level of polishing a barrel, very low. Can I afford to take a loss here? Yeah, but probably nothing bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? I'm using very non-aggressive polish. Like it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But, at the same time as I was polishing a barrel, Pat was taking my AEG gearbox out and putting an HPA gearbox, or not gearbox, but an HPA setup in. Very different, right? Very different skill set. I could not have done that for the first time the way that he did it. No way, no how. So you need to be honest. It's like, can I actually do this? And I have no problem admitting, like, when I'm looking at the Kythera, I'm like, I bought it, but I don't know what to do with it, right? And that's okay. It has to be okay. Otherwise, I'm going to be in a really bad way if my only airsoft gun, which is my only airsoft gun,
Yeah.
is sort of sitting on a bench for 2 months. Like, how am I going to get ready for Iron Horse? It's not going to work.
No, no. I bought the Kythera engine. I actually traded a fairly unique MP5 gun to a guy on our team, and he had this brand new Kythera engine that he bought, and then realized he didn't have any clue how to install this and what else it was going to need. He didn't buy the regulator or the tank or the line, any of that stuff, or a UGS, a integrated universal stock that holds the air. Anyhow, he bought none of that, but then just had this expensive, engine. And he was like, oh, I really want an MP5. Would you be willing to trade one of your MP5s for this engine? And I was like, I quickly looked up what a Kythera engine was selling for at the time. And at the time it was about $300.
That's a good deal
for an engine. And I was like, now the MP5 I gave him was very unique, was not meant to be imported to North America at all. It came from, again, my local shop. They're an ICS dealer, and ICS brings in all their guns and puts them all over the walls and everything like that. And they had this MP5 that was very unique. And these guys, a lot of times at those big trade shows, they don't want to go home with all those guns. So they'll either sell them or give them away to people. And they just gave this one to these people that own Fox Airsoft because they're such a good ICS retailer for them. So they gave them a couple guns. So I was in there and they're like, oh, check this thing out. It's so cool. Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, yeah, I love it. I love MP5s, and brand new MP5, my only new MP5 that I've ever had. And so they sold it to me. Literally, it had to be cash. And it was like $120 for a gun that is not legally supposed to be in North America, because HK was going to sue the crap out of ICS for doing this. And so it was a, so it came in, it was a shooting like just a tick over a jewel, so I was like, okay, this is a European gun. Anyhow, I bought it for cash so that they could go buy beer, and and there was no way they could inventory it. So bought it, did it, traded that to the guy, and I felt like it was a good deal for both of us. And and then the guy got out of airsoft, and he literally calls me up and he's like, "Hey, do you want your gun back?" And I was like, "Dude, I can't." I mean, I literally could have had that. And I told him, I was like, no, you need to sell that. I feel bad about having both your Kythera engine and my gun back. But anyhow, that's another story. But
did you buy it back?
Oh, I did not. I was like, one, I didn't have any extra cash laying around and feeling good about, giving him what it was worth. And nor was I going to give him back the Kythera engine because I was already into that. But
Mm-hmm.
but the thing is I bought that engine and not knowing how to install an HPA system at all. And again, doing research, looking online, watching videos, talking to people, and I struggled through it, and it was tough.
Yeah.
Like it was really, really tough. But it taught me so much, like crazy amounts. And so then when I went to install an F2 engine in, it was so much easier. Like
Yeah.
way easier the second time through, and then building other people's kite their engines or guns.
Yeah. Well, I think, and this is a really good point for people who are listening to this. Is like, listen, if you're not prepared to, if you don't have the skills and you're not prepared for that learning curve, then you're really not setting yourself up for success, and you're not setting yourself up to have a non-stress free time. Because again, if everything you have is riding on this bet that you're making,
Yeah,
then you better have really good odds in your favor, have all the skills,
yeah.
or you got to be, realistic with, okay, well, how much effort is it going to take? And we're not talking here about like, oh, I'm just swapping a motor or whatever. Like
Or changing a
it's
bucket
okay.
or a barrel.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah,
if you're going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to have to go in there. I'm going to have to figure out what's wrong. I'm going to have to take it apart. There could be parts missing. It could be, gears. It could be, like if you don't, like if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I'm not really sure whether which direction the anti-reversal latch goes in. Well, probably you need to do a bit of research and figure that stuff out
step away from the
before.
bench.
Well, yeah, right. And like, just if you don't, and it's not that we're trying to gatekeep people from doing that, but
Yeah,
there is knowledge that you need to have, and there's experience that you need to have before you can realistically say, "Hey, I'm gonna go and fix a Boneyard gun, and I'm gonna save a bunch of money doing that."
yeah. I mean, the first one I ever bought was from, I think, Airsoft GI. They had it listed on their website. It was $60 for a plastic body AK
Nice.
47, and I was like, what the hell, and there's some amazing stories about them selling. These large retailers, they sell thousands of guns every year, and not every one of them works. Or
Yeah.
sometimes things happen, goofy things that people do to them, and then they're like, oh well, it's a warranty, so I'm going to send it back. But the best story that I've ever heard from them is um, the story about the guy buying a really expensive LMG, like a $700 LMG, and getting the gun. And he's like, okay, I'm fully prepared to, go into this. He bought it for like $175 or something like that. It turns out it was a fuse. The fuse was burnt,
Yeah.
which is the first thing that I always take out of every airsoft gun.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so are those deals out there? Yeah, it's happened. But I think you also, and again, back to the thing: are you willing to roll the dice
Yeah.
and know what you're doing?
Absolutely.
These are important things to know.
Yeah.
So, but then there's, where do you find them? Like you said, lots of different places. You can even find them at your local, um, buy, sell, and trade days.
Yeah.
Go to your local field. And a lot of times people bring out all their old stuff that they're not using anymore, selling off old guns or guns that they're just not using. And I'll tell a story out of school here. Sam, our buddy Sam, he just did that last weekend. He picked up a Tokyo Marui M4.
Nice.
It looks gorgeous. The pictures I've seen, the guy was a collector, and he just, much like you and your FAMAS, he picked it up, and it's all plastic body, but he's like, do I touch it? Do I open it up? And I was like, nah, just leave it. Just leave it. Just it's a good one. It's a wall hanger.
Yeah.
But I think he spent like $80 for it or something like that.
That's wild.
Yeah,
That's wild.
good for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because it sort of brings us full circle. Like Tokyo, they were the gold standard, and people have like unpopular opinions that Tokyo sucks and all this kind of stuff. But for the longest time, man, especially if you're buying an older model Tokyo, not necessarily stuff that's being made today, but
Mhm.
stuff from like 10 years ago that's still available out there, like collectors have, etc. It's very noticeable, the quality difference between that and similarly marketed models, you know.
Oh yeah.
I bet that plastic body Tokyo, if it's from, you know, the, let's say 2010s or something like that,
Hmm.
feels really nice
Yeah.
compared to a plastic body G&G M4 that's identical,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So it's
Absolutely.
you know, and you if you go and you play with that gun, then great. But you know, like, you also, that's all part of that residual market, that used market. One thing I would say, just as a last, you know, a last thing, when it comes to buying used guns in particular, if you're in your local community or you're looking online and stuff and you constantly see the same types of
Oh
guns on sale, and I don't mean like, oh, there's lots of M4s on sales. Yeah, bro, we know it's like the most common gun. But I mean, like, if there's a specific type of airsoft gun, make and model, that you see repeatedly being sold by people, chances are that's because it's not very good in some way,
yeah.
shape, or form,
Yeah.
right? There's some sort of like congenital issue with that particular maker model. Back in, when I there was a one model in particular, it was like a PD, it was a like a PDW style M4.
Hmm.
Was made by WE, I think. It was a
Oh
gas
yeah.
blowback. Gas blowbacks are a nightmare, I've learned since. But regardless,
Yeah.
this one, if you just the visual of it, it had like a folding stock that was like a wire stock, or like wireframe stock, and it
Oh
had like the
yeah.
barrel with like the divots in it, like a golf ball kind of.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And they were on sale on Airsoft Canada almost every week for super cheap, right? And I was like, this is great. As soon as I get my $300 Canadian, because that's what stuff costs in Canada, that once I get $300, I'm gonna get it. And then someone was like, well, have you ever stopped to consider why there's so many on sale all the time? And I was like, no, it's just a great deal. I'm like, it's because people are trying to offload them because they're not great. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. And that's
Well,
not necessarily the case, but it's definitely a question you should be asking yourself,
oh,
right? When you're looking
absolutely.
at used
We
guns.
all think we're going to get the one. You know, you go on Amazon, you look at every, you know, the thing, and it's like $12, and but there's all these reviews that say, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible. And it's like, I'm going to get the one that's good.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to be the 25% that survive. You know, that does well. I don't know. It's just it's a thing that we all do to ourselves.
Yeah.
We always think we're going to be the winners, and I just, again, rolling that dice. Every once in a while, it comes up, but a lot of times it's craps.
Yeah, totally. Well, listen, Chaz, I really appreciate you taking the time
Yeah,
to for this chat. It's fun. I hope people who listened, who are considering boneyards or stuff like that, get an opportunity to sort of think about it, and you know, come on the Discord and ask us questions. Like, if you're looking at a boneyard and you're thinking about, you know, fixing something up, and you think you might be missing information or you want a second opinion, like, ask people there. Like, the community is super helpful. You know, it's not just Chaz. Like, there's lots of people in there who have very in-depth knowledge of airsoft, HPA, GBB, like AEG, all of it. So don't be shy. Ask your questions first before you spend your money. And that'll make sure that at least you're stacking the odds, you know, in your favor as best
yeah,
as you can.
no doubt.
So, Chaz, thanks for being here today,
Oh,
buddy.
thanks for
Always glad
having
to
me.
talk to you.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys, for listening. Like I said, join the Discord if you want to keep the conversation going. But until then, that's all I got for you this week. Take care. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.